Hey there friends, my name is Varj, and today we're talking nodes. I'm super excited to dive into this series because there's just so much to talk about. Almost every single core mechanic has integrated into the node system, so for the sake of the length of this video, and my sanity of course, I will not go into every subsequent mechanic or system, just because this video would end up being like an hour long. Plus I'm going to have additional videos for those later on. Now with that being said, let's go into the basics. So there are going to be a total of 118 static node locations, 103 which will be traditional nodes, and the remaining 15 will be castle nodes. Each node that advances stage 3 or higher will adopt a zone of influence and will control vassal nodes. These vassal nodes contribute to the parent node and aid in its advancement while offering strategic positioning and resources. So essentially advance the node, get more influence, conquer the zones, and rule the world. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Varj and I'll see you in the next one. Wait, what do you mean that's it? I'll have you know I put my heart and soul into that. I mean, come on, you guys are so ungrateful. No, I'm just kidding. Now, if you reacted even remotely similar to how I did the first time I heard all that nonsense, then you should probably have that unique aura of visible confusion all over your face. You're probably like, what the hell is this guy on about? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because that's why you're here, right? It's a complicated system, but it's pretty simple as well. You just really need to understand it at the basic level, and it's just really not too bad. So now that I'm done acting like an idiot, let's actually take that deep dive into the node system of Ashes of Creation. Alright, so first of all, we really need to understand what these nodes even are. Well, nodes are one of the most important core mechanics and systems implemented in Ashes of Creation. Everything is literally going to revolve around this system. I mean, based on the location or biome of the node, it can offer a variety of scarce resources to access to special quests and content, all the way to providing strategic positioning for open world PvP, sieges, hostile takeovers, all that jazz. Beside that, they act as one of the most fundamental identifying factors for players in Vera. I mean, just think about it. When a player chooses to become a citizen of a node, they are committing to a location where they will work to advance their home and compete against other players for dominance, not only in the region, just in general on the map. I mean, the cool thing is this is left up to the player 100%, and it can vary based on the goals of that player, the resources they need at the time, or like petty stuff, like the grudges they hold against citizens of other nodes. It actually sounds like it's going to be pretty dynamic, but now this brings up an interesting point though. This means depending on a player's contribution and aspirations on a specific server, the same node location could be at different levels of development, have completely different aesthetics from one server to another, so it makes it dynamic in that respect as well. The aesthetic thing is not going to make sense right now because I haven't touched on it yet, but I'm going to in a little bit, so just hold off. Luckily, with over 100 static node points on the map, there are plenty of locations to choose from. Actually, to be more specific, there's 118 total, 103 being traditional nodes, which is kind of what I'm going over right now, and 15 being castle nodes, which is what we're going to get to here in a little bit. Nodes will have 6 stages of development, stage 1 being a basic wilderness camp, to stage 6 being a large metropolis. From the information that we have at the moment, the first stage takes, just a few hours to advance, not too much, while for example, from stage 5 to 6, could take up to many weeks. So this brings up a few good points. This means losing a development stage late in the game is huge. It's a huge time sink because the time invested is going to be so big that this is going to motivate players to defend or actually attack what they put their effort into, depending on the situation, of course. Stage 3 unlocks many core mechanics to the node system, such as allowing citizenship and being able to have vassal nodes within their zones of influence, which again, those two things might seem a little foreign right now, but I'm going to be getting to them here in a second. Now to level a node, a player within the node zone of influence will be contributing to the parent node. As nodes develop, dungeons, raids, world bosses, mobs, I mean the list goes on even to like quests, events, resources, all that stuff. We'll have, within a specific zone of influence, we'll have a diverse level range and will be based on progression of the node and its racial influence. So what does this mean to you really? Well, this means that if you're in an Elven node at stage 6, you could have a completely different experience than someone in a Dwarven node at the same level. Additionally, as these nodes level, they will start to allow trade routes, citizenship, government, etc. This system relies heavily on player agency and almost expects a certain level of corruption or a clash of ideals. Now this might seem strange, but let me explain it here. So in Ashes, governments will be chosen a few different ways. I'll get into more detail of this when I touch on node types in a minute, but let's just assume, for the sake of this argument, that it's an economic node and that members of government are elected, quote unquote, based on financial positioning within that node. So essentially they just buy their way into office. With all the players in Vera, there are bound to be those that align with them and align against them. Additionally, the taxes imposed by the parent economic node that we're talking about, it's just put a strain on all their vassal nodes, and they just don't like them very much. Because yes, the parent node does dictate the vassal node's taxes and policies. So what's this going to do? Is this going to force a war? Is it going to force sabotaging of some kind on the trade routes or the production of that economic node into submission? In turn, will this force the economic node to just fork out insane amounts of their wealth to hire players to defend them? So this is what I'm talking about here. There's a lot of dynamics going around, and there's a lot of potential for player agency to kind of just take the reins and give all the power to the players, which is kind of nice to see. Alright, so I briefly mentioned zones of influence before. What am I even talking about? What does that even mean? What does that mean to you guys? Well, it's actually exactly what it sounds like, and it's not too hard to understand. This illustration here is going to help me do a pretty good job of explaining it in very simple terms. So, as a node advances through specific stages of development, it will gain influence and hold power over smaller, lesser advanced neighboring nodes, like these circles here. These nodes, also called vassal nodes, will fall within the parent's zone of influence, so this big circle, and in turn will provide stuff like experience, resources, advancement opportunities, stuff to help the parent node actually progress. Now, in order to be considered a vassal node, it needs to remain at a lower stage, because it would not make sense if I was a parent node and I consumed a vassal node next to me, but it was higher than me. It just doesn't make sense. So basically, as a node advances, its influence expands and starts to enslave the surrounding, less advanced nodes within its zone of influence, eventually creating like a country of sorts. Now, why does this sound so familiar? Anyway, moving on. Now this sounds great and all, but what does this look like from the player's perspective? How is it going to look like when you guys get into the game? Alright, so let's set the scene a little bit here. You just created your character, you zone into the game, you've been playing for about 30 minutes or so, you hit level 5, right? And you stumble upon this very small, basic looking camp with just a few NPCs in a tent, right? That's all you got to work with. Now you really like the surroundings, right? You notice there's an NPC giving quests to kill local wildlife for food and collect valuable resources for construction, and you're like, hell yeah, I'm staying here for a while. So you venture out, you complete your tasks, you report back to camp like the good little adventurer that you are, and you notice there's more quests that pop up, and you decide to take them and embark on them. But this time, when you come back, the camp's not out as it was. It's much bigger, it's more populated, it has crucial vendors there that you can now like replace gear with, possibly get into crafting and gathering and stuff like that. So what did you just see? What just happened? Well, you just saw your first node, and you saw its first advancement stage, from the first to the second stage, or from the 0 to the first stage, depending on the node that you came in contact with. Now, one thing to note here, aesthetic is huge in Ashes, and aesthetic of the node will solely depend on the race that contributes the most to the initial stage of development. Now, you may not like the aesthetic of the node that you're in. Say, for example, you really don't like Dwarven aesthetic, and that's the one you came across. And honestly, this could be the reason why you just abandoned the node, and you let it either atrophy, or you let somebody sack it to reset its development. Now, speaking of atrophy, this is very much a threat to any and every node on the map. If players halt production or contribution in any way, it will eventually de-level, and this could cause it to lose its zone of influence and its surrounding vassal nodes. So to kind of set the stage here a little bit, in turn what could happen is you could have a parent node that de-levels. It causes a vassal node to actually replace it as the parent node, and that parent node is now the vassal node. So far, we've been primarily talking about traditional nodes. Let's briefly take a look at castle nodes and see how they work. So, castle nodes are primarily going to be for alliancing guilds. Just to kind of put it in simple terms, if you ever played a game like Arcade, they're going to be very similar to how those castles operated and how you siege them. There's one victor, one loser, that sort of thing. It's all pretty basic. However, in Vera, these castle nodes will be strategically positioned to where guilds or alliances can capture them, and they can really profit from them. And like traditional nodes, they're going to have their own zones of influence and vassal nodes. The difference with castle nodes from traditional nodes is castle nodes will always be a militaristic node. And again, we'll get more into that typing here in just a second. And not only that, it can only be advanced by the alliance or guild who occupy or commit time to them, or who are citizens of them. Now, from what we're being told, these castles are going to be incredibly difficult to attack, and guilds from all around the server can sign up to either defend or attack. Again, player agency. If the whole server wants it to go down, it's going to go down. Now, this could create leagues and alliances to form, and it could create an interesting dynamic for every server, because every server is going to be different, right? As far as sieging, these castles are going to be on a timeline that players are going to have to pay attention to. So for example, castle sieges, they're going to be on a 1-month rotation. So every month, it's going to give both sides enough time to prepare defenses and prepare offenses as far as capability goes, whether you're going to bring siege cannons, stuff like that. It gives you enough time to kind of prepare for all that stuff. For defenders, building up vassal nodes is going to be crucial, at least that's what we've been told. They're going to be really a stone wall for any ill-prepared attacking force. That's kind of what those vassal nodes of those castle nodes are there for. For the attackers, preparing siege equipment and staging offensive maneuvers will save not only valuable time, but it'll allow you to kind of bypass those defensive vassal nodes that are supposed to be stonewalling you, but because you're prepared, you don't have that objective pushback. Now, since we're already talking about it, traditional node sieges will work pretty similar to castle node sieges. There's going to be a large-scale PvP battle to decide the fate of the node. Attackers can choose to either disable a node by compromising weak points or crucial vassal nodes, or just destroy it outright, and that's pretty much the difference there. For example, if I didn't want to completely destroy said node, but I just really needed them to stop their production of iron ore, and they were just ironore.com over there, then what I would do is I would attack that node to disrupt the parent node's operations. Something of that nature. More strategic instead of just all-out destruction. In the end, it's standard siege PvP tactics, guys. I'm sure there's going to be some curveballs on both sides that everybody's going to have to adapt to, but we're just going to have to wait and find out what Steven and the team has in store for us. Alright, so we're finally on to node types. Nodes will aim at mirroring a real-world community of people, and like in life, communities vary. Some will be hellbent on war and conflict, while others will focus on, scientific discovery and advancement. They all have their place in various, so let's just go over them one by one, and let's really just break down each here. So there's going to be 4 different types of nodes: militaristic, scientific, economic, and divine. Each type will have its own benefits and powers it can impose on the world around them. These include things like, specific type of buildings, specific type of superpowers that open up at different levels of development, NPCs, aesthetic, etc., etc., etc. Now, from a node's initial stage of development, at least from what we're told, so like stage 1, it's going to be apparent what kind of node it is. So you should be able to walk up on a tent, for example, and see guards. Okay, that's militaristic. Or you see priests. Okay, that's a divine node. So on and so forth. Now, instead of just highlighting each, I want to really take a deep dive into these and really break down what it means for us as players or citizens, what it's going to mean to be a part of these nodes. So since I kind of already went over this earlier in the video, let's go over economic nodes first. So as I'm sure you've all been able to figure out by now, this node focuses on value of wealth and currency. It will have certain amenities such as special kinds of merchants, an exchange of some kind, marketplaces, etc. And there will be a heavy focus on trade, merchant services, and things of that nature. It's probably going to open up special kind of caravan routes or trade opportunities for citizens of those nodes, but I don't think that's been confirmed yet. So for example, maybe there's an extremely rare resource in the node zone of influence. Usual caravan routes won't go that way because it's too dangerous. Maybe there's bandits or, lava. You can use your imagination on that one. However, with an economic node, the value of trade and profit pretty much trumps everything. So the citizens of that node are willing to take that extra risk, and it gives the players a more dynamic experience in that area. It's kind of cool to think about if you really think about it. Now, an economic node superpower will essentially turn them into a global auction house. So if you played like World of Warcraft and you've used that auction house at least once, you get the gist of how that would work. Lastly, as mentioned before, citizens of the node can buy their way into positions of power. I was going to say elected into the positions, but there's nothing electoral about it, to be completely honest. If you have money and you can buy your way in, then so be it. Alright, so on to military nodes. This is just basically going to be PvP heaven, if you haven't already figured that out. There's going to be a real focus on combat and class training, and I would imagine there's going to be some skills or augments that you're going to be able to get only through military nodes, or being a citizen of one. I mean, think about it. How cool would it be if you could combine skills or create secondary skills or secondary effects or just boost existing skills or effects? That'd be pretty awesome. Of course, this node will have more combative NPCs like guards and class trainers, but it's also going to have something that I really like personally, and it's called bounty hunters. It just so happens to be the node's superpower, which unlocks at stage 4. Essentially, these players will be motivated to ruin the day of those of you who live to ruin mine, aka gankers. So thanks for that, by the way. Lastly, affected officials will be chosen by trial of combat. Again, I'm not seeing the electoral aspect here, but whatever. This means the most skilled PvPer will rule those nodes, and it's probably going to make my life hell if I'm anywhere near that node zone of influence. Now, scientific nodes, they're going to be interesting because they're going to have a huge focus on artisan skills and construction, which is a huge part of Ashes. This node will have obvious NPCs like scholars, but it's also going to have special artisan NPCs. And eventually, as it develops and goes into a metropolis, for example, it's going to have the ability to teleport between vassal nodes, which just happens to be the scientific node's superpower. Now, if that's not good enough, there are going to eventually be multiple scientific metropolises in the world. If this happens, they can link themselves by airship travel. Now, this is huge for a few reasons outside the obvious ones. We have been told that crafted gear will be essential, it will be the end game, and fast travel will not be a thing, and not everyone will get flying mounts. And you can probably see where I'm going with this, but it already sounds like scientific nodes might be the way to go, but it's just too early to say for sure. Elected officials are actually elected here, and it will operate more like a democracy. So citizens of this node will vote for players to represent them at the highest levels of their node societies. Alright, lastly, we've got divine nodes. These are religious in nature, guys, plain and simple. Some obvious aspects of this node are going to be the presence of priests, divine statues, temples, etc. This doesn't really need to be said, but there is an obvious focus on faith here. Something not so obvious is a focus on equipment and skill augmentation, something I didn't really expect from divine nodes. Now, I know I mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about militaristic nodes, and I still think it's possible. However, most augmentations are going to come from divine node citizens. Many of the benefits of divine nodes haven't been communicated to us, but let's try to brainstorm a little bit. Perhaps citizens of these nodes will be able to augment skills for their players, maybe by producing parchments of instructions which can be sold for profit on the auction house. Or maybe there are certain aesthetics that will become available, depending on the religion you decide to settle with. I don't know, the opportunities here are endless, so I just can't wait to see what we end up getting. Alright guys, so we're almost done. Just a few honorable mentions. Player housing. This is a hot topic for many people, including myself, so this is something I wanted to make sure I hit on. Player housing will be directly tied to node progression. Now, I'm not going to actually go over player housing right now, but just know that housing options become available as the node advances through the stages of its respective development. Lastly, underrealm nodes. Not a lot is known here, but we know they're going to be obviously underground, but also along coasts and on islands. The caravan routes that are going to be with these underrealm nodes will also go underground, and there might be some rare resources to be had from these routes, we're just not sure because it hasn't been communicated yet. Now, influence and abilities will be focused around the presence of water or the sea, which means that these nodes will probably be the naval combat outlet for anybody interested in that. So for example, if you liked the naval combat in Arcade, it's probably going to be something similar. Also, this could extend to professions like fishing, which would be really nice. Intrepid did note that the coastal cities would be more susceptible to naval sieges, so there's actually some strategy involved here as well. So that's probably going to be playing a role here in the upcoming Siege Alpha. And that was it. You guys made it. I hope it wasn't too difficult to consume. I know it was a lot to absorb, and I hope you guys just learned something from it. If you liked the video, if you didn't like the video, leave a comment, let me know. Next, we're going to be deep diving into the class system, and I'm really excited for that video. There's a lot going on there, and I'm just really excited to get into it. Once again, my name is Varj. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.